You heard a little bit this morning from Michele about Intuit, your sponsor here. And so this session is actually going to be conducted by a couple of the architects on my team, Vinay, Kumar, and Chetan Desai, about some of the things that we're doing with Node and some of the lessons that they've learned. So without further ado, I give you Vinay Kumar and Chetan Desai.
Hey everyone, thanks for coming. It's great to see so many people here. I'm Vinay Kumar. I'm an architect on TurboTax Online and on teams that write services and consume services to provide TurboTax for our customers.
And I'm Chetan Desai. I'm Chetan Desai. I'm the DevOps architect who worked on the platform that we'll be talking about today.
Cool, and so a lot of us here work at big companies, and I think we've been hearing for our whole careers that startups are nimble, enterprises are slow. We can't hope to keep up as fast as startups do. And so the real question is why? Why is that the case, or why do we believe that to be the case? And a big reason is that big companies tend to have a lot to lose. We have existing revenue, existing customers. So anything that's new, there's some risk there. So in our case, in TurboTax, we have tens of millions of customers, over $1 billion of revenue. And so anytime we talk about, hey, we're going to replace this technology choice with this one, there's a lot of planning, a lot of contingencies, a lot of, is that really the right thing to do? You know, that the risk scares us at times. And at the same time, we have a lot of legacy technology and systems. We have existing code bases, we have existing services. Now, a lot of times these are assets, but they can be hard to work with as well. So you might have services with proprietary APIs, think a lot of SOAP and XML. We've got data in silos. We've got all this great data on our customers, all sitting in these big Oracle databases that you can only access through JDBC and so on. And we have a lot of security standards. You know, that goes back to having a lot to lose. When we have the trust of so many customers, keeping track of their data, taking care of it is our biggest job. So we take a lot of pride in doing a good job of that, and we have a lot of measures to make that easy. So if you look at everything on this board, though, those are all good things. Those are all assets. So why do they slow us down? Because I think really it comes down to risk. We're afraid of what we can blow. There's some other reasons that big companies move slow. So what are some things that just suck as a developer, as somebody building services at our company? And you know, I'm going to talk about our company for a bit into it, and you know, maybe this list is the same at your company, maybe it's different, but I think some of these are going to resonate. So provisioning hardware, getting new hardware in our data centers is a pain. And yeah, now we live in a world with AWS, and that makes it a lot better, and Intuit's really adopting AWS, but now there are, well, we've got this hardware in AWS, this in our data centers, and they're different, and we have to work in both environments. Anytime we have to configure hardware, you know, load balancers, setting up pools, ACLs, that's a pain. We've got existing authentication systems. Again, that's a nice asset to have that we can single sign on with the rest of our applications. But those APIs, you know, they were built for Java apps to work with. They have Java SDKs, but you know, if you're introducing Node or another new technology, that's one more strike against you that you've got to work with. We have a very strict security review process and a lot of standards, but at the same time, that means that you know, our security people are very familiar with some technologies and other things are completely new, and so there can be a lot of red tape there. Just a lot of problems that are sort of there regardless of your technology. Versioning, build and deploy. How do I get the bits that my team created onto those servers? How do I do updates? How do I do rolling updates with no downtime? You know, like I mentioned, we're going to AWS now, but there's a lot that's different in AWS, and if you're running in a homogeneous a heterogeneous environment where you've got services in AWS and services in your internal data centers, that complexity is hard to manage as well. So really, the idea is that as a service developer, I've got all these things I have to worry about, things that sort of make my life difficult. And even though none of these problems are really uninteresting, it's all interesting technical work, the key is that time spent working on those problems is time that I'm not spending solving my core customer problem. And nobody in this room is building services just to get to 5 nines of reliability, or nobody is here just to build rolling restarts. It's all to provide some value for our customers. And you know, if any time we're not spending on that, you know, it's not the best use of our time. And you know, Nat was here this morning, our senior VP, talking about the speed of innovation today, and the cycle times that used to be measured in weeks, months, and years are no good anymore. We've got to measure in hours and days. So any time that we're not solving for the customer is potentially time that we're losing ground on somebody who's trying to solve the same customer problems that we are. So what this tends to look like then is if you're a service developer, you've got this whole stack that you're responsible for. You've got the customer problem and the core use case you're solving for near the top, but there's all these ilities that you're also responsible for: scalability, operability, monitoring, updates, all that stuff I just mentioned. And that can take a lot of time too. And as a developer, it's kind of cool to own your whole stack from top to bottom, but that's a lot of contextual work that you're spending time on too. And it looks okay when you've got one service to build, but when you're at enterprise scale and you've got a lot of services, you suddenly have a lot of teams that are doing this, that own this whole stack. And there's a lot of the problem that's common among these teams. The good thing is we've been at this for a while, and we've been getting better at this. And we have a lot of great Java developers. And so we're getting a lot better at just cranking out the ilities. And we learn patterns, and we learn what works well. We have tools that we're familiar with. But still, it's a lot of time not spent on our core problem. Now where it becomes even a bigger deal is when we add Node to the mix. So if we go back about 6 or 8 months, we were looking at adding some new functionality to TurboTax, some new features, and basically we were looking at this new pattern of using application services, which are the front end, back end, to implement a lot of business logic around use cases and orchestrate back end services. And we believe that this is what Node is great at. A lot of us have been hearing for years now, that's the sweet spot for Node. And so we wanted to dive in and learn about that. We had a lot of Java experience, not a lot of Node experience. So that was sort of the catch. It's like, hey, we know how to build services in Java. We know how to deliver them, maintain them in production, update them, and so on. But it's all new to us in Node. So if you go back to this problem, take this and make it even worse in that now all of this stuff is new to us as well. And so you put that into an environment that I described before where we have all these existing customers, existing revenue streams, and the question becomes, okay, really, even if Node is the right fit for the problem that we're about to jump into, are we really the right group of people to take it on? Do we know how to do it? Can we stand to lose if we don't get it right? That was really the use case that we were looking at about 6 or 8 months ago. So I didn't like that. None of us did. We wanted to turn that around and say, can we use our size as an advantage? Rather than see all these as reasons why we can't do something, that's backwards to me. We've got all these assets, we've got all these smart people, we've got to be able to solve this problem. We can't be stuck forever. And so how do we use size as an advantage? Well, the one thing that I always think about is economies of scale. We have a lot of people, we have a lot of smart people. How can we turn that into an advantage? And so basically what we came up with is this idea of let's dedicate a team to solve all these problems once. Yes, it's new to all of us, and we can try to hire some people who know Node, and we can bring in a lot of help. We've worked a lot with Node Source. They've been awesome in helping our teams get up to speed. But basically what we said is we can't rely on that old model where every team is solving every problem, and now they're all starting from scratch. That would just never work. If our goal is to move fast, that's not fast. So the idea is we've got all these business problems that apply to every service, and let's get one team in charge of solving all of these problems and really iterating and experimenting and figuring out how to solve these problems. And we can train up this team to be the experts in Node and to learn all about how do you load balance Node and how do you cluster multiple instances and should you use cluster for that or should you use something else? And all of these questions, we came up with a list of, I think, 30-something questions about 6 months ago. And we said, well, the last thing we want to do is have 5 different answers for each of them. We want one group of people to go after all of those. And then the idea is that once we have that set of solutions, we can leverage those solutions across many teams. So we can't have just one team that's building services. That's not going to scale either. We have a lot of teams that are solving for customers, working on a lot of products, and we need all of those teams to be productive and build services. We heard Michele, our chief architect at Intuit this morning, talk about everything as a service. Every team is building services. So how do we enable those teams to move fast? We let a platform team build solutions to all these problems and then leverage them across many teams. So basically about 6 or 8 months ago, we put a stake in the ground and said we were going to start. We picked 3 services, 3 teams that were ready to go, that had their use cases defined, knew what they wanted to do, and were ready to start working in Node. All 3 teams had actually started working in Node and had sort of reached the conclusion that it was the right tool for the job, but they still had a long way to go to get their services production ready. And we created a new team, a service platform team, and said that this team is going to be in charge of solving all of these common problems that we can then scale across the whole company. So if we go back to the diagram that I had before, what we're really doing is splitting the problem. We're saying the service team up top, you focus on your customer problem. The core business logic that we want to deliver in that service, that's what that team owns. You own just that part and move really fast. the rest of the problem, all those ilities, all the load balancing, how much hardware do we get, where does this hardware run, how do we achieve high availability, we said we're going to let a platform team solve that. So now you teams can go off and focus on your own things. And then the cool thing, what I was just talking about, was the leverage. So once we have this platform team working, they can build this platform and it's reusable. And then when we go to having multiple services on it, all of these teams are just focused on their customer problem. So the platform, we build it once, we really dedicate a team to learn and grow and iterate on the best solutions, and we let every service team come and leverage the solutions that the platform team has come up with. And so what this really is dividing and conquering the problem. And so how did we do that? How are we effective? So we came up with this concept called collaboration via SLA. And one of our architects, Boki, who's been running around all day today, many of you guys have seen him, he actually wrote a white paper talking about collaboration via SLA and what that means and what an SLA is. And it was really explicit about, if you're a service developer, these are the things you're responsible for. If you're a platform, these are the things you're responsible for. And what was really great about it is it's explicit about what each team does and what each team doesn't do. So it really enabled teams to focus on their area of expertise and to trust that somebody else was going to solve the rest of the problem. So the platform teams solve the common problems once, and the service developers focus on their services functionality. Now, I'm not going to pretend that we're going to get everything right the first time, that the service platform team in 6 months is going to learn everything about Node and figure out multi-tenancy and load balancing and everything. But the key is, we're not going to solve it perfectly initially, but we're going to keep at it. And those service teams are going to keep working and iterating and trying new things and talking to the community and seeing what's out there in open source. And the cool thing is, as our platform gets better, all of our services gain from that. So we went out the door, we launched on December 1st. Chetan's going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. But the cool thing is, our platform is going to keep getting better over time, and these service teams are focusing on their services, and their services are going to run better over time as the platform gets better underneath them. So with that, I'll hand off to Chetan, who's going to talk a little bit more about the specifics of the platform.
All right. So now that we have this vision for this platform, we need to figure out how we're going to go about tackling it. And so the first thing we did is come up with kind of a set of strategies or guiding principles to help us do that. The first is that we wanted to identify and front load those long lead time items. So, what is going slow at the enterprise, and make sure we took care of those up front. We also wanted to make sure that these services were abstracted from the hardware that they were running on. So we had 3 new services, and we had wide ranges of really what their throughput would be, and we were unsure of what their footprint would be. And so we needed to design a platform that was flexible on where we placed these services and how many instances of the services were running. We also needed to make sure we were clear on that SLA, so that when service teams came onto the platform, they could reuse the build and deploy for it. They could reuse things like logging and monitoring, right? All those ilities that we've been talking about. So our overall goal was remove the pain, right? Remove what sucked for service developers at Intuit. So we had to narrow our scope a little bit. We had TurboTax as a very seasonal business, right? We have our December 1st for launching for the new tax year. So we had to be very clear on some requirements for our V1 of this platform. And so we decided a couple things. We would be hosting in our internal data centers, so not out in Amazon. The 3 services that we alluded to would be the first ones on this. They'd all be built in Node, and we wouldn't be utilizing container technology like Docker for this first time around. So what does this implementation look like? So we identified those long lead time items. We allocated hosting for VMs up front. We had a projection about how much footprint that these 3 services would needed, and we got all those VMs up front. We also set up pools for load balancing up front also to make sure that that was taken care of. We needed to design flexibility into this. And so what we did is we allocated port ranges for each of these new services to run on. And so that was part of the load balancing configuration. And so what this allowed us to do is achieve multi-tenancy. And so where services lived and how many running instances was just a config change. If all of our pools were set up with port ranges, then it was just health checks that brought these services online and offline and moved them around our pool of hardware. And then we wanted to make sure that this platform team provided solutions for those ilities. And so based on that SLA, we're able to provide a common health check framework, a logging and monitoring framework, so the teams could just adopt and go with those.
And one thing, just the flexibility that Chetan mentions is really valuable, because we went back and forth a long time on, well, if we've got 3 services, should we allocate 3 sets of nodes, 3 sets of hosts, for each one? Do we use multi-tenancy? How many instances of each one do we want? Do we want to cap it? If we've got 8 cores, we don't run more than 8 instances total. And what we really learned is we're not going to be able to answer all those questions up front, especially something Chetan mentioned. All 3 of these services were new. All of the use cases and features that are depending on these services were new. So I know I was a pain for some people, including Chetan. They would ask, well, how many transactions per second are we going to get on the service? I'd say, well, anywhere from 200 to 1,200 per second. He's like, well, how do I build to support that? So, that was this idea that, hey, we're not going to know up front all these answers, so we have to build the platform in a way that we can tune it and adjust, and as we learn, we have the flexibility that we can rearrange how we deploy our different services without having to go and buy a bunch of new hardware or spend a lot of time reconfiguring our network.
So since these services adhered to this SLA, we could reuse a lot of stuff for build and deployment. The first thing is we could create these templates for CI and release jobs to build these services. We knew what they looked like, and we could just get those up and running really quickly. We also utilized an internal tool we developed called Continuous Delivery Dashboard, which is a tool that allows developers to sign off and promote new versions of their code to different environments. And so we're able to hook this node service platform right into it. The last piece is we're able to create reusable chef cookbooks to do the actual deployment. So the node service deployment was reusing cookbooks. The upstart configuration for process management was a reusable cookbook, as well as the log management for both log rotation and then Splunk agent configuration. So when we take a step back and kind of look at V1, we know we're going to learn a lot throughout this season here that we just started, but we can reflect on some of the development in these past 6 months. So the first is, what worked well? So multi-tenancy was awesome. So and really that flexibility that we built into the platform. As we went through perf tests and started to really understand the footprint more of these services, we were able to just change configurations and make sure that the services had the hardware that they needed. The reusable build and deploy was awesome as well. So there are definitely some things we learned. The first is that really DevOps is fundamental to building and packaging a great node service. So node is just your binary executable. You don't have a container to take care of stuff for you. And so when you create your node service, you need to bring its whole package along with it, everything with the security or whatever. If you're using Express or Restify or all that comes with your package. And so it's really important that you have a good DevOps practice there. The second is that lots of small modules is okay. So when you're on a platform and all these teams need to have a common logging and common monitoring framework, creating small modules that can be reused for those particular functionalities is great. And it makes it easy to onboard too. There's definitely some stuff which needs work. So we need to figure out a good internal hosting strategy for private NPM modules. There's definitely a few solutions out there, but we need to figure out what that looks like at Intuit. That will allow us to really share these modules and share creativity throughout Intuit. The third piece is that we really need to define open source both internally and externally. So internally, we need to make sure we have the tools and infrastructure in place, like things like the private NPM repo, so that teams can collaborate on these items. And then we need to have a clear process in place so that our service developers can create and contribute stuff back to the open source community. We also need to grow our node expertise. So these teams building these 3 services were really learning Node as they went. And we brought in Node Source and they were a huge help for us. But we envision lots of new teams building services on Node moving forward. So we have an opportunity to really develop a center of excellence for Node knowledge. So what does this look like? There's kind of 2 different models which are out in the industry. One's kind of your embed and expert model, right? We have this core platform team that are becoming Node experts and can help these services teams answer some questions. There's also this meetingless collaboration model where, if you have great documentation on your NPM module, people can just go there, see how to use it, grab it, and go. And what's great about enterprises is we can kind of afford to do both. So if you look at companies like Amazon, they have a whole set of Amazon Web Services and developer documentation around it. But then they also have AWS solutions architects that you can interact with to get kind of one-on-one experience. And so we can afford to do both as well.
Yeah, I think one thing there is, we talk about building up a center of excellence, and I think into that, enterprises can do both, this embedding an expert. Like it should be even less friction for us to do that internally. Like, yes, as a company, you can go hire a solutions expert from Amazon, but it's like, if we have a set of people with a lot of Node experience who really know best practices, their salaries are all coming from the same place as the service developers. And so, that's the great thing about all working at the same company is we can decide, hey, that's the best way for this team to spend their time, is to take somebody from that team and to embed them onto this other team and really share their knowledge and grow them. And we're not paying, whatever X the retail cost is for, to bring in a solutions architect. It's actually, we work on the same team, we're working towards common goals. And so, one thing we talked about a couple times through this talk was this idea of divide and conquer. And if anything, looking back at it in the end, we might have taken that a little too far. We might have divided a little too much because we realized looking back that we had 3 teams all building services and they were learning as they went and they weren't really sharing the knowledge. So that's sort of a gap and something we can really get better on, is this idea that we have to really help these teams, especially as we have new teams. We have 3 now that have experience, but as we bring new teams onto the platform, we really need to put them in a position where they can succeed by providing that expertise and learning whatever they learn in the process of building a new service, feeding that back into the platform and back to the rest of the service teams.
All right, so to kind of wrap us up here, how do enterprises move fast? And how did Intuit move fast? So again, identify and prepare for those slow-moving tasks at your company. Second piece is divide and conquer, right? We have so much great expertise within our enterprises. We know we can utilize and tap into all of those resources. This next point here is pretty important. So if you look, think back to Vinay's slides about that brown area of the core piece that the platform team was solving for, those ilities. When you solve for that once, you're causing the service developers to give up some control of their stack. They don't have control of the whole stack anymore. Now they have to conform to a piece of the platform, right, via that collaboration via SLA. But you can make that conformity pleasant and easy to use. And so we don't want to create a platform that's a take it or leave it, right? And you have to adhere to this exact way of onboarding. You can make that conformity easy by making those shared modules open collaboration, right? If you want to do an enhancement to the logging framework that the platform's using, make it available so that these service developers can help you do that. And as we know, people like to adopt easy to use things. So if they can, if it's easy to use and they can collaborate to it to make it even better, then that's awesome. Cool, so that's all we had. We'd like to open it up for questions now.
And we also have in the audience, we have a couple of developers from the platform team and from the service team. So they'll be around later too if you guys want to talk to them, and we might make them answer questions too. Yeah. She bring the mic. Hang on, so the rest of them can hear. Thanks.
Oh, so my first question is, or my only question, I guess, is about your NPM. First, are you using a private NPM repo? If you're not, how are you distributing those across team? And thirdly, are you doing versioning? How are you doing versioning? Because you have this whole tier of modules that you're having to distribute. So how are you currently doing that?
Yeah, so today we're experimenting with the Nexus private NPM repo right now. It's not being used yet. We're still playing around with it. So today we're sharing it by a Git link. And so not the right way to do it, but we're tagging a version on the Git repo URL. That's how we're pulling it in.
And so like if that changes, you just have to tell everybody how you need to update it?
That's right. Yep.
But it's the versioning on the Git repo actually anything two tags, the 1.0.0, and the lower version for the current version that is going to 1.0.0. So clients don't need to, I'm sorry.
Start over, Marcelo.
Sorry. In regards to the versioning, using Git repositories for that, I'm maintaining two versions. One, the current one, that is the target one, the 1.0.0, and the lower version as another Git tag, where when you do npm install, everybody's just referring to a 1.0.0, but actually is consuming the actual highest lower number in the tag. So it does not enforce clients to all the time change their package.json. Does that make sense? Yeah, so kind of.
How do you go about validating that there are security holes in the open source? How do you go about validating that there aren't security holes in the open source modules that you're using?
That's a great question. That's probably the toughest thing right now, probably the biggest scare or fear that I have. I feel like, if we can't scale Node, I'm confident we can figure out how to scale it and we can throw hardware, but security risk is the biggest thing. So there's a couple things. One, there's the Node security project. So there are people who are constantly reviewing NPM modules and publishing via API the vulnerabilities. So there's actually a tool you can run that will look at your package.json and look against the security project's database and tell you, hey, you have these versions that are vulnerable. So again, that's not perfect because that's only about vulnerabilities that have been discovered and documented so far. But that's one thing we're using. And actually, one thing to keep in mind there is that we might build a version of our app today and a vulnerability is discovered a week from now. So we need to keep running that job routinely to verify that whatever is out in production doesn't gain a vulnerability or doesn't expose a vulnerability that's found later. So that's one part of it. Two is just working with the community, being active in the community, trying to understand, talk to others who are using modules. We work with Node Source a lot to get their input on modules. Three, for some modules, we started to review them internally, but again, that's that's very difficult. You can't really trust it that you'll catch everything. So I think it's really about being part of the community there. But that's one thing I think we as a larger community have to understand is one of the big things that's an opportunity for us to all get better and really share there.
Hey, so kind of building on the private repository question that he asked, we've been using Sinopia, and it wasn't one that you mentioned, and it's been working good for us so far, but it made me really nervous that you didn't mention it. So I was curious if there was something that we hadn't run into yet.
No, yeah, not familiar with it. So
Okay.
we did try Kappa for a while, but we have a different build environment and couldn't really utilize that.
So actually, I
Go ahead.
can provide a little bit of feedback. So we did actually look at Sinopia for a while. The problem is that whenever this is quite a critical component that you need to put in. At the time that we were evaluating Sinopia, Nexus came out with their private NPM repo, and since we were or are a big Java shop as well, Nexus is kind of a heart of our build and deploy infrastructure. So we kind of dropped Sinopia for the time being to evaluate NPM because that would be a more integrated solution for us. But it's definitely on our radar, and it's definitely something that we had initially even looked at contributing back with right before Nexus came out. So there was nothing that disqualified it at all. So if you're using it, feel free to use it, and please give us feedback as well about like what your experiences are with it. So.
Yeah, I think one common theme, we talked a little about the scope for tax season. There's so many things that we want to do in the platform that we want to tackle, and it's just like we had to draw a line somewhere and say, well, we've got to get the product out this year, and then we'll come back to it. So, a lot of, can we generalize the platform so it's not just Node, so we can use Docker to take advantage of other things? Like, yes, there's nothing we built that precludes us from doing that. We just haven't gotten to it yet.
Got a question back there.
So, regarding the Intuit Services Ninja, initiative, I was wondering, did your 3 service teams publish any of their services in the Intuit service catalog? And as you were using Node, did you have any difficulties, for example, using Swagger or consuming the Intuit gateway services or gateway protocols?
So all 3 are published in the Intuit service portal. Do you guys have any comments on Swagger, like whether we were able to get that working then, or?
One second.
I'm building a reference app for the service platform, and I've been looking at Apigee, Strong Loops solution. It's kind of like if you come from the Java world, you think about data-driven development. I like it, Strong Loop, because you don't have to write the JSON file that describes your Swagger. Then you look at Apigee, that you have to write the whole spec, right, manually. I don't want, it's kind of the cut there. To go to the services platform, the catalog, as you asked, the portal, I used the Strong Loops version to generate the Swagger API. And I had to massage the production server to actually talk to the proxy to serve, but at least I have a working version in the catalog. If you look for Node.js reference, very small little app, but we're working to get that done.
Nice.
So, so earlier you said you allocate about 20 ports per service. And you had an embedded expert thing, which makes me think that you don't have like a central person that says, okay, you get these 20, you get these 20, you get these 20. Do you coordinate that via like a wiki somewhere, or how do you make sure that I didn't pick the same 20 that he picked?
So as the platform team was in charge of allocating those 20 ports, but what the 20 ports did is gave that service team flexibility on whether they wanted to run 2 instances on a box or up to, up to 20.
Yeah.
So just to add to that, so I think what we did, and tell me if I'm getting this right. So for service A, we say that you get these ports n to n plus 19 on every box. The next service gets n plus 20 to n plus 39 on every box, right? So
yep.
each service got its own range. We put those ranges in the load balancer, and then it's just a matter of how many instances do we start on each box.
Okay, so it is a central group.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's that list of which ports are assigned to which service is centrally managed. What we need to manage then as well is, okay, for service A, how many instances do they start up? Because if you start up 20 and service B starts up 20, you're competing for the same processors. So there needs to be management across there. It's a centralized decision. How many are we running on each box?
Can you speak a bit to the rationale of the 3 service teams that were building on Node and why that was selected, and the investment that your team has made, and like as to why Node?
Sure. So I think in all 3 of these cases, we had the service was implementing application logic, really, logic that's very close to the user and to the use case that they're solving. And so the idea is we would have to iterate very quickly as the user requirements changed. And in each case, the heavy lifting for that use case was implemented by other back-end services. So we have a tax engine that we use throughout our products that does tax calculations and can provide a lot of information about tax returns. We have a back-end analytics engine that can provide insights and predictions about what users are doing. So those services do the heavy lifting. What we needed to do was essentially orchestrate calls into those services and generate JSON responses that our UIs could use. And so for that job, like everything that we've heard in the industry, that's the sweet spot for Node. Not doing heavy computation, but a lot of high throughput, variable response times because you're depending on downstream services. We didn't want the application services that we were introducing to become any kind of scaling bottleneck when it's those downstream services that are really doing the heavy lifting. So that was our hypothesis when we started about 8 months ago. We did a proof of concept where we actually spent about 4 weeks on one of these services, actually building it out in Node and iterating and really proving to ourselves that, okay, the benefits that we think we get with Node are true, that our developers can move really fast, the edit test cycle is really fast, and so on. So we were kind of able to prove, okay, we get the benefits, we haven't really seen anything stopping us, and we've been going for the last 6 months and really seeing that there haven't been any big surprises in that sense so far.
Yeah, Stephen Loomis, IBM. So one question is, by SLA, I assume this is service level agreement based. So how do you contrast the sort of agility, quick innovation with the service level agreement and the avoiding the take it or leave it? Because those seem like somewhat at odds, right? Because you have stability versus innovation, and how do you keep a balance there?
I think that's one thing that we're still learning and getting good at. This was a V1, and I think one of the things that we mentioned but didn't really talk about is this idea that we started with 3 teams, and it wasn't intentional, but it happened that all 3 teams and the service platform team are all on the same campus in San Diego. So it gave us that ability that they actually could meet with each other in person every day and talk through these sorts of things. So in terms of the SLAs that we defined, it was more about here are the teams and how they divvy up responsibility. Here are the parts of the problem the platform owns and what the service teams own. We did not get to a point of definition that here's the exact API for logging or for monitoring in advance. That was an ongoing, we worked at it as we went. So I think that there's still, as we scale up to having many teams building on here, that's where we've got to keep iterating to get better at.
Yeah, and I think the key moving forward is making sure that those are open collaboration things. And so, if someone wants to change it, they can, and they have a voice in what it looks like.
Hi, Andy Pham from Walmart Labs. Could you go into depth on how and if you were able to reuse your existing CI and CD for Node.js ecosystem?
Yeah, so since Node was a new technology at Intuit, we did have to kind of develop best practices around building and deploying Node services. And so Node Source helped us a lot with those best practices. But we were able to reuse our deployment infrastructure because that continuous delivery dashboard that I referenced, it's really just a bunch of hooks. And so we were able to push the bits using Chef to these boxes.
Your existing Maven or Java pipeline for Jenkins, you were able to reuse that for Node?
Yes. Okay. Yep. We did wrap it with Maven for versioning and bundling, but that's where a private NPM repo would take over.
But you're still using Maven? So you're still using Maven to build your Node?
It's really just execing out NPM calls, but yeah.
And then our artifacts, do those go into Maven as well?
Yeah, our artifacts are being stored in Nexus.
So then does each Node project has like a bomb XML file that Maven execute?
Yeah.
Okay.
To go back on the question about why we chose Node.js, I wanted to mention portability because we have to support TTO, to protect online, but we also have desktop products. So using JavaScript, we were able to package the application and run it on desktop version on top of V8. So that was also common reusable code able to run.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We don't have time to go into that in a lot of depth here, but just that's a requirement that was specific to TurboTax, that everything we were building in these services to run in a hosted environment for our online products we needed to run them on our customer's computer for our desktop products, so TurboTax Windows, TurboTax Mac. And we've used C++ for that historically. We haven't found a better solution than C++ in many years. We've tried with Java, and it's never worked. So that was another part of that proof of concept that we said, can we take the services built in Node and use Browserify to compile that into a package that we can then embed into our desktop product and run in V8. And actually, that's worked out really great. So that's another thing that, I don't know how many companies are going to have that requirement where you need to take your service and run it on your customer's computer. But if you do, we've had a lot of success with that. And maybe at the next Node Day, we'll talk about that.
Nope. All right, great. Thank you very much, Vinay and Chetan.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.